Hello and welcome to Unprofessional Engineering. My name is James.
You got Luke.
Luke, we're continuing our series on companies that built the world, this time looking at Intel.
This one was interesting, James,
Why,
because
you imply that the other ones are not?
no, it's not that I guess I never realized how much processors, that's what obviously Intel is known for. Like they are literally in every single thing that you and I interact with, like almost on a daily basis, definitely on a daily basis, because they're in our phones. I mean, it might not be an Intel chip inside of your phone, but there is a microprocessor of some sort, like
This is news to
literally.
you.
No, I guess I just never thought of it like that. It's probably one of the most pervasive companies that we've covered, where they're like everywhere.
That might be true.
Like
Yes, they are
TVs,
everywhere.
phones, computers, if you're doing anything on the cloud, and where I thought of it was like I was reading about processors, and it's just like the computer you're looking at right now as you're reading this article is using a processor to do everything it needs to do to allow you to read this article. And it's just like, how is that? Like it was like the Matrix all of a sudden. So
Mine does not have a sticker on it telling me what is inside of it, but it could be an Intel
oh, the old
processor.
Intel Inside marketing that they did
Yes,
back in the
which we'll
day.
get into. Yes. So before we get started, Luke, I have a fun fact for you.
Shoot.
The company's name comes from the words integrated electronics, INT from integrated and EL from electronics. Huh?
It's a good name, and I'm
It is.
surprised that they chose that name like way back in the day. Like,
They did.
so whoever was in their marketing department that decided this, clearly they were like great marketers like you and I are.
Very clearly.
Because like integrated electronics just is not,
A
yeah,
good name. No.
yeah. So,
No, I mean, not a bad name, but it's no Intel, right? I feel like
yes,
everybody's gotten their money's worth out of this episode already with that
for
one fun fact,
for
right?
sure.
All
So,
right.
speaking of money, let's
Ooh,
let's talk about Intel by the numbers, right?
are they sponsoring us? Is that what you're telling
No,
me?
they are not
Oh,
sponsoring
oh,
us. So,
crap.
Intel was founded on July 18th, 1968, in none other than Mountain View, California. I mean,
Love Mountain View.
so when you say Silicon Valley, it's because of Intel, like because of the silicon and the chips and the computing industry booming. It's Intel that where that name essentially came from. The founders were two cats by the name of Gordon Moore, aka Moore's Law. We'll talk about that a little bit later. And another guy by the name of Robert Noyce,
That's how I said it.
like
That's
like
noise.
like how all the young kids
Like
Noyce.
the kids these days.
There were a couple other people involved there, but the current CEO is a cat by the name of Patrick P. Gelsinger. He's been there since February of 2021, so not all that long, right about a year at the time of us recording. They have 121,100 employees globally, and that includes their subsidiaries because there's a boatload of subsidiaries that they own.
And they won't even hire me. That
Yeah,
hurts.
McAfee. They bought McAfee
I
last year, I
saw that.
think,
Did
which
you
was
ever see
interesting.
the stuff about McAfee's creator and he
Oh,
was hiding from
he's
the government? He might be
bananas.
dead. I don't know. He might
He's
have died.
crazy, I think.
Yeah. Yeah.
Andrew McAfee, I forget what it is, but
I
yeah,
don't know.
he's insane.
Yeah.
Their stock ticker is INCT, and as of yesterday, it was trading for a whopping $48.28 a share. Uh, Fun fact about their founding is when you hear about like Apple and Microsoft, it's all these like young, unknown people that started these companies in their garages. This
Yeah.
was totally different
This was
because
nice to see for a change,
it
right?
was. These were middle aged engineers that have been in their industry for a while. They went to school, they did everything that they tell you you're supposed to do. They got some funding to start their company and kind of did this what you would say is like the traditional way rather than that like one hit wonder startup like Microsoft and Apple out of a
Yeah.
garage.
I had a few things about that, Luke. One, I think this is good news for us. our good friend here, Gordo Moore,
Mm-hmm.
he in fact went to the lowly Cal Berkeley, that
Eh.
making it so that only Bobby Noyce was the one that went to MIT. So
Oh.
only one of the two has the MIT connection. So I was glad to see that. But like you said, they were, I don't want to say old guys, they were middle-aged guys. They were
Yeah.
like us starting a company, but they were competent, you know?
Yeah.
And they had basically the first venture capitalist, Arthur Rock, that they were, in cahoots with. And he lined
2.5
up,
million.
how about that, right? And that's
Like
2.5 million. And back in that
back
time,
then.
monies, like
So
what was it, 68 or something like
yeah,
that? That's
68. So
that's impressive.
so this Arthur Rockcat, he is the one that actually coined the term. Like it wasn't there were venture capitalists before this, but he's the one that coined that term venture capitalist where
He was
it
the
was
OG.
yeah, it
That's
was
what
these
they call them.
people, exactly. These people that
Yeah.
have lots of money that are banking on something like a little old Intel microprocessor company taking off. Can you
Yeah.
imagine? I don't know if his Arthur Rockcat is still alive or not, but could you imagine the person that invested like the first 2 point, like how much money like he or his family or his grandchildren or children have, right? It's got to be like astronomical.
I like to think that those people or that person had the same kind of like financial intuition that I have. And once I made like a very meager profit, I would sell
I'm
all of it
out.
only to watch it continue to skyrocket. That's what I'm hoping happened because I'm a negative, mean person like that.
That's funny.
Yeah. Noyce was the co-inventor in 1959. So before this whole integrated, what was it? Integrated electronics company,
Mm-hmm.
of the silicon integrated circuit, when he was the general manager at a place called Fairchild Semiconductor, which was a little piece of the Fairchild Camera and Instrument Company. Moore
Mm-hmm.
was the head of research and development at Fairchild Semiconductor. So, like you're saying, these people knew what they were doing. They had good reputations. They
Mm-hmm.
knew a lot about the industry. They weren't just two dudes in their garage, playing with chips for Atari like others. Immediately after founding Intel, Noyce and Moore went and poached a bunch of their boys from Fairchild, right? They showed up and they're like, hey, we got this new company. You should come work for us. One of them was a businessman named Andrew Grove. And between Noyce, Moore, and Grove, all three of them served as chairman and chief executive officer, CEO, for those of you not in the know, in
Mm-hmm.
succession during the first 3 decades of the company. So from the get-go, the three of them just like ran everything, which is
Mm-hmm.
rather impressive.
So I think we should. Do we want to continue with the history of Intel? We going to keep on rolling here?
I'm good with that. Yeah.
Okay, because I think one of the things that we probably just need to, if you happen to be one of our, I'll say younger listeners, because
Uh-oh.
James, we're all about educating. We're all about STEM and STEAM and getting an
I'm only about STEM.
inspiring. Oh, you're not into STEAM?
I don't acknowledge Steam.
But maybe you don't know what a microprocessor is. So, like, what is a
Oof.
microprocessor? So, I really don't know what it is either, but what the internet tells me it is, it's essentially and the reason why the word silicon is the chips themselves are made out of silicon. That is like the substrate or the material that holds all of the different processors that are inside of a chip. And essentially, what these do, James, is they just do math. I mean, that's all this is. They execute programs and they essentially process a whole bunch of ones and zeros. I mean, that's
They do
that's
all the
that's what
ones
they
and
do, and
zeros.
it's literally, and we'll talk about Moore's law in a little bit, but it's literally millions and millions and millions of processes happening in like literally seconds, depending on the size of the processor and whatnot. So it's essentially it just does ones and zeros and just carries out what you tell it to do,
Right.
and that's all it is. Nothing
I
nothing crazy.
I agree with that. I mean, it is something crazy, but nothing crazy all at the same time. I think you've bought enough time for us, Luke, that we should probably pause for our first break. This one being a word from our sponsor.
Intel, thank you
It
very
is, it
much.
is not Intel. I keep being told by one of our friends that cold emailing people really works well and gets you connected with folks. So maybe we should actually do it. Maybe this is the year, Luke, that we actually start reaching out to people and get some cash money. If any of you want to give us cash money, just email us at unprofessionalengineering@gmail.com. We do have 2 shout outs, though, Luke.
Who do we got?
Shout out number 1, Tony S.
Good
I
old
am a
Tony.
degreed chemical engineer that has been working in manufacturing for the last 10 plus years. I find myself hitting the books again as I study for the Principles and Practice of Engineering, the PE exam, for those of you not in the know. Have you ever explored an episode on what it takes to earn a PE license? What engineering career paths require a PE and which don't? We have not done that, Tony S., but I have added it to the list because that is kind of interesting. PE has never been something that I've done. And I said to him, I thought it was only civils who really cared about that stuff. But he wrote back and said, no, stupid, it's others as well. So
Yeah, I think depending on like where you are, like I did a little bit of work, and I'm sure you did this too when you were doing work with Bettis. I was doing some work with Westinghouse, and there are all these kind of like, I'll say, lowly mechanical and like structural engineers. But then there was like
us.
there was one line of offices that was all PEs, and basically you would do all this work, they would look at it, tell you it was right or wrong, and fix it, and then they were the ones who were the responsible engineer to approve or not approve. So
That's tough. I have a friend who's a PE, and I mean, I do not want him approving anything. So there's that.
Who's our next
Fortunately,
shout
he doesn't listen. Shout out to Lauren P. Another chemical engineer. So I am a chemical engineering sophomore who attends Auburn University.
Go Mud
I
Ducks.
just wanted to say I love listening to your podcast. Thank you. I love you listening to our podcast as well, Lauren. I also love all the humor, roasts, and sarcasm that you add in, and they make my road trips back and forth between my hometown and Auburn very entertaining.
So James, you and I are probably the 2 least sarcastic people I have ever met. I don't know what this person is insinuating.
Lauren clearly is misunderstanding.
Clearly misunderstanding. Oh, goodness.
Oh, I love it. Lauren continues, could you please send me some stickers when you get a chance? And this hurts a little bit. I know it may be weeks or even months before you get to it, James, but I would appreciate it anyways. I mean, the fact that everyone even knows just how bad I am at it and that it is my fault.
The expectation is set, James.
That's right. The bar is low. Well, thank you, Lauren. I will get those stickers in the mail within the next couple years by your graduation, I promise. I can't promise that, but I'll try. That's 2 or 3 years away, you know. Anybody else that wants some stickers not delivered to them in a quick fashion or a very slow response via email, but perhaps a chance at a shout out on an episode, go ahead and email us at unprofessionalengineering@gmail.com.
And don't forget to subscribe, like, share. We love the reviews. And as always, you can tell your smart devices to play the Unprofessional Engineering Podcast.
That was beautiful, Luke. Getting started. That's what my next section is. What do you say?
Yeah, I think we're good.
All right. Their initial products were memory chips. This would be the world's first metal oxide semiconductor, the 1101.
Well,
yes,
1101 is what people in the know would call it. I mean,
it had a sibling, the 1103. Is that better?
Yeah.
Or the 1103, the 1103.
So the 110 tray, it was a single kilobit dynamic random access. So like when you think of RAM right now, like DRAM is what it is. Like now it's like DDRAM and all these other ones. I don't keep up with hardware anymore like I used to. Mm-hmm. But it was a single kilobit. Like I don't even know if I can comprehend what a single kilobit is anymore. It's easier to comprehend bigger than it is to think about what 1 kilobit is.
I have somewhere later in my notes when we get into processors and things like that. I remember back in the day when, I must have been like middle school or something silly, when my dad upgraded our computer from 4 megabytes to 8 megabytes of RAM. And it was like, boom, it's so much faster. Like it's just amazing how much things have progressed over time. The 1103, as you would say, was their first successful chip.
Yep.
Its predecessor was kind of a bomb, but it got them moving down the right path. It was purchased first by the American technology company Honeywell Incorporated. Honeywell would probably be a good one for us to do an episode on, Luke. And this was bought in 1970, so shortly after the company started. And it was used to replace the core memory technology in its computers. Because it was cheaper and used less power than core memory. This became like the new standard for computers everywhere, which was pretty convenient for Intel, right?
Mm-hmm.
I do like it when big companies like that are also connected to what becomes a big company. We had another one where I think Disney was the first person that bought something from them. I don't remember if it was Apple or who it was, but Disney was
Oh,
there. It
yeah.
was like a spectrometer or something. I don't remember,
There's
but I
actually a
liked that as
connection
well.
later on that happens with
Yeah. Oh,
in a
really?
few years. Yeah. So moving on,
Yep.
1971, James.
71.
71. So two engineers by the name of good old T. Dog Hoff and actually three of them,
Oh,
Frederico Hagen and Stan Mazer. Uh, they invented the first single chip microprocessor. So we were just talking about processors, which is what they're known for now. It was the very first one, and this thing was a 4-bit microprocessor. Like
the power.
but so here's the interesting thing. Like there's so much stuff that goes into these. So if you think about it, we're only at 64-bit right now. So this is 1971, and we've only made it to 64. So you know,
What's interesting is like they developed this erasable, programmable, read-only memory, right? The EEPROM, and this was their most successful thing up through 85. So
mm-hmm.
this was their bread and butter for
Yeah.
over a decade.
People still didn't pick up on the microprocessors right away.
No, not so much. Something I found interesting in the same time frame in 72 was that not everything Intel touched turned to gold. And one
Mm-hmm.
example was in 72, they decided to grow and enter the digital watch market
I saw
by
that.
purchasing Microma,
How
which is
much?
interesting.
How much did they lose? It was a lot.
Well, they ended up that after a while they gave up. They sold the watchmaking company 6 years later, and they lost $15 million
That's what it
on
was.
that. But think about that, Luke. That was 4 years after they kicked off, right?
Yeah.
And they're now acquiring companies and then selling them off at that big of a loss. Like, whoa, this
So
is big money,
this is a perfect example of kind of like knowing your swim lane, right? And
right?
a good example of another failure that happened like this, and they could have learned from Intel, was like Microsoft decided to do the Zune or Zoom or whatever it was. It's
Oh,
like
Zune,
know
yeah.
your swim lane. Don't decide to go into digital music and compete with Apple. That's not your lane. Just stay out of it. So
Has there ever been a successful digital watch? Like the Apple Watch, I find
it,
questionable as to if it's successful.
I don't
I know
think it's
you have one,
successful.
but
I think the Apple Watch is becoming almost like it's just something that's connected to your phone to make using your phone easier. But the watch by itself, I don't think is a
yeah.
success.
In 74, Luke, Intel controlled 82.9% of the DRAM chip market, which is stupid. But
Yes.
then a whole bunch of other companies, foreign competition, etc., showed up, and their share or their control of the market dropped to just over 1% by 1984. But by that time, Intel didn't care because they had moved away from memory chips and onto the microprocessor business that you had
Mm-hmm.
alluded to previously. One of the big things that worked out in their favor was that, not only was this a good decision, but they kind of teamed up, or at least IBM decided to team up with them, where they used Intel inside of basically everything. So in 81, IBM chose Intel's 16-bit 8088. How would you say it, Luke? 8088?
I'd say 8088.
8088, that's tough, to be the CPU in the first mass-produced PC. So this was kind of a big win. They also, fun fact, IBM also contracted with a small firm out of
This was the
Redmond,
connection I was talking
Washington,
about.
Microsoft Corp, which provided the DOS operating system for the PCs. I wonder how many of our listeners remember DOS. And eventually Microsoft supplied Windows for all of the IBMs. And so it's just this horrible creation of Wintel where everything is Windows and Intel based on all of these machines. And I say it's horrible because later on we'll get into some of the legal troubles and claims of being a monopoly for these different companies. The next thing I have is 1993, but do you have anything else you want to talk about, Luke?
I don't think I do. That's I. Oh no, hold on. Oh, one of the many microprocessors that they were building when they got to the 32-bit chip. This was 1985. This is the first time where they made sure that things would be backwards compatible, meaning
I did see
like
that.
they
Yeah.
like every time it went from like one chip to the next chip to the next chip, there was no guarantee. Like it might work, but there was no guarantee that anything that was built specifically for the current generation would work for previous stuff. And 1985 right. was the first year where they basically ensured or committed to backwards compatibility. So
that was nice of them. I think before we get into the 90s, Luke, we should take a break for this week's Luke's rant.
Okay, so we're going to talk about it in a little more detail after the rant, but there's this thing called Moore's Law, and I'm just going to read this kind of directly. So Moore's Law refers to Gordon Moore, one of the founders of Intel, perception that the number of transistors on a microchip would double every 2 years, though the cost of the computers would be halved. So as you get double the power, the price is also cut in half. Moore's Law states that we can expect the speed and capacity of our computers to increase every couple of years as well as pay less for them. The tenet of Moore's Law asserts that this growth is exponential and it will basically never kind of cease to happen. So here's my issue with Moore's Law. I mean, essentially, you are guaranteeing that every year, and it's kind of like an Apple thing with like Apple phones, like you are always going to have something better in 12 months. And I think when you think about like phones and computers, they literally have become disposable because of Moore's Law. So I remember back in, I don't know, probably early 90s, late 80s, I remember friends that had personal computers, and they would have these things for years, and they would put new chips in them, put memory in them. They were big and heavy. They'd have them for 5 or 6 years. Now people get a laptop and they end up throwing it in the garbage a year and a half later and don't even worry about taking the stuff out of it. So while I like the idea of Moore's Law, there's got to be some way from like an environmental standpoint, like a recycling standpoint, to make sure that the equipment itself maybe stays the same, and then you're just swapping processors. Because if the reality is every year I can get a brand new computer, that means every year millions of people are just throwing out computers. And we have a whole episode about recycling. And
you stole it.
Oh, you were waiting for it. And I mean, it's one of the hardest things to recycle is consumer products, especially computers and phones, because there are so many bits of plastic and metal and gold and silver. It's really difficult to recycle, and it just seems super wasteful and terrible for the environment to throw out computers every year. But if you're making a better computer every year, people are going to buy it, and people are going to be pulled by that. Because I don't know about you, but I like getting a new phone every 18, 24 months and just literally throwing out the old one.
I don't. Mine still has a big crack in it, but I'm not
renewing
it for different reasons. Yeah, check out our episode on e-cycling if you're going to throw out your laptop, but also check out our episode on, was it resistors?
I think
transistors?
So.
Capacitors. It was capacitors.
Something with an
no, it was capacitors. It was capacitors. Check that one out because it talks about Moore's Law and that it's actually been kind of like updated and kicked to the curb because they've said it's just no longer economically feasible to do this. Like the cost of increasing the speed in the way they're currently doing it isn't feasible anymore. So the time's going to be extended until the speed doubles or whatever it is, but also they're going to have to change the actual technology going into it to be able to keep growing in this way, so that it's going to have to be other changes that increase speed and everything else. Okay, 93, Luke.
What do you got?
93. I lost it, but
93
there it is.
Was
the
Prince
Pentium.
Spaghetti Day.
Prince Spaghetti Day?
That
I don't
was
know what
so
that even means, dude.
I graduated in '93, and that was our class motto for the year was Wednesday's Print Spaghetti Day.
I don't know
We had
anything
a
about that.
we had a big tractor trailer parked behind our high school for 4 years that said Wednesday's Print Spaghetti Day on it. So
Oh, okay. Well, that sounds classy. Question for you. Did you have a graduation song?
we
And
did.
what was it?
It was AC/DC's Back in Black.
Oh, very good. That's a good song. All right. The Pentium was the first Intel chip for PCs to use parallel or superscalar processing, which increased the speed rather significantly, Luke. It had 3.1 million transistors compared with the measly 1.2 million transistors from the predecessor. It combined with Windows 3 dot whatever, mine knowing the 3.1 operating system, and the much faster Pentium chip helped everybody, just do stuff more quickly. And this is when I was thinking. I remember my 386 processor and the 486 that
I remember
followed and
all that.
upgrading my RAM. But Intel's business strategy relied on, like you said, making newer and faster processors. And that's where Moore's Law comes in. For example, the 8088, as you would say, found in the first IBM PC had 29,000 transistors. 4 years later, the next one had 275,000. The Core 2 quad processor in 2008 had just 800 million transistors. And then in 2012, when it was the Itanium line, the Itanium 9500 came out, it had 3 trillion 100 million transistors in it in 2012, and they continue to grow. So that's kind of
It's
craziness.
bananas, is what it is.
It is absolutely bananas.
So the thing that I find interesting is if you look at, I don't know if you ever I did some stuff on like pictures of the chips and like how they're fabricated and how they're manufactured.
Okay.
It went from basically a handful of cats like on an assembly line just kind of like standing there putting stuff together. And if you look at it now, you would think that they were performing brain surgery because apparently because of these 3 trillion processors that are in these chips, like
Transistors.
transistors, I'm sorry, these 3 trillion transistors that are in there, like a speck of dust that would occur inside of that chip would completely ruin the entire chip until it gets enclosed and has all the the stuff wrapped around it. But like you would think like they were dealing with like deadly viruses. Every person is wearing head to toe, like looks like a hazmat
That
suit.
that bunny suit they called it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they have like like updraft and downdraft, so there's like no particulate in the air. It's climate controlled. It's crazy the effort that goes into building these chips, like how to keep them clean. Because apparently, I don't think we mentioned it. It was back in, I believe it was like the mid '90s, maybe the '80s. They had an issue where, and I don't think it was a defect based off of fabrication. It was just like they just didn't work. One of their
This is where I was
processors,
going next. Yeah.
they had an issue where it didn't do, was it addition and subtraction correctly? Like I forget
Yeah.
which one it was.
Right. It was division.
Yeah,
It was called the Pentium flaw, and it
yeah,
did division incorrectly, is what it says. But basically the company engineers discovered this problem in
hit
like
it.
93. Yeah, they were like, yeah, we're just not going to mention this. But then Thomas Nicely from West Virginia, Lynchburg
WVU.
College, no,
It
Lynchburg
wasn't
College.
I thought it was WVU.
No, WVU. Come on, Mountaineers. He discovered the flaw as well and was like, yo, what's this all about? And at that time, Grove, who was the CEO, resisted a recall on the product, which is understandable. But when IBM announced that it would not ship computers with the CPU anymore, it forced a recall and cost Intel a measly $475 million. That being said, fun fact for you, Luke, during his tenure at CEO, Grove oversaw a 4,500% increase in Intel's market capitalization from 18 billion to 197 billion, making it the world's most valuable company at the time.
So speaking of the world's most valuable company, James, I'm assuming
Unprofessional engineering,
yeah,
yes.
yeah. I'm assuming that they've never had any legal problems.
They absolutely have not had any legal
I'm
problems.
teeing you up here because I'm out of
Thank you.
information and I know you got a
Oh,
bunch.
perfect. Let me talk about some of the legal problems. So, since it was so successful with its buddy Microsoft, Intel did have some allegations of being a monopoly over the years. In 2009, the European Union fined Intel for just under 1.5 billion with a B dollars for alleged monopolistic actions. Also in 2009,
Rough year.
bad year for Intel. They paid AMD, who we probably should all know is a competitor, 1.25 billion to settle a decades-long legal dispute where AMD basically accused Intel of like pressuring PC makers to use
Only use theirs.
their chips, right? 2007, they also had a little bit of legal problems.
Kerfuffle, I think is what we call it.
Kerfuffle is the technical term. Transmeta filed a lawsuit against Intel for patent infringement, covering computer architecture, power efficiency tech, and stuff like that. This was settled. Intel agreed to pay 150 million, so they, just probably pulled that out of their pocket, and then 20 million per year for the next 5 years. Both companies agreed to drop the lawsuits, and Intel was granted a perpetual non-exclusive license for all of that good stuff. And then the last one that I had. Oh, go ahead.
I have a question. So when the government, when the government files a lawsuit, where does that money go? Like, does the government take the money and then like they just like give themselves bonuses? Like I could see like if AM
Infrastructure bills.
like if A okay, so it
I
goes
don't
into some
know.
kitty and does something because like if
I
AMD
assume.
sues you and you give them money, then the money goes to AMD. But if the government sues you, like who gets that?
I don't know. That's a good question.
Hmm.
Shadiness. They should use it to sponsor podcasts.
They
Oh,
should.
one more, and this isn't really Intel being bad so much, but just something they got caught up in. This is a case of industrial
Oh
espionage
no.
back in '95. And this is nice, I guess. And AMD and Intel were involved. Guillermo Gaed of Argentina was formerly employed by both AMD and Intel and was arrested for attempting to sell the i486 and Pentium designs to AMD to certain foreign powers. Basically, there was he videotaped data of his computer screen at Intel and mailed it to AMD, and then AMD immediately alerted Intel. So that was good of them, right? They could have just gone and used this stuff, but this dude was convicted to 33 months in prison in 1996. So there's that. That's all my legal stuff. I don't think I have anything too interesting here. Well, I had some good information about in the 90s, they started not only making chips, but they started making motherboards as well. So that really helped out their bottom line. Around that time in the mid 90s, they owned 40% of the overall PC market, which is kind of crazy. There was also a big hubbubaloo. How about that?
That's a good one.
Where Steve Jobs announced, yo, 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 we're going to start using Intel chips in our computers as well, which was another big deal for them. So basically, other than for like some servers and mainframes and really high end things, Intel stuff is used everywhere. Everywhere.
So guess how many, you ready?
7.
No. Semiconductor units shipped worldwide in 2021.
2 billion.
Wow. Did you look this up?
No, that's just a guess.
It was 1.14 trillion were shipped.
Why did you even say wow? I was so far off on my guess. It was not impressive.
Did you say? Oh yeah, you were far off. Yeah, you were way off. Never mind. I was looking at my numbers wrong. Sorry. Um,
That's
that's a
impressive.
lot. That's a lot.
It is a lot.
And then if
It
you
is a
think of
lot.
the number of transistors in each one of those, like that, I don't even think you can calculate that number.
No, that's too big. That number doesn't exist.
Oh goodness.
Some fun facts for you, Luke. Do you want
Shoot.
them? In
I do.
2020, Dell accounted for 17% of Intel's total revenue. Lenovo, which I have in front of me right now, accounted for 12%, and HP accounted for 10%, which is pretty impressive. Originally, the company's name was going to be NM Electronics, but they decided that was a bad name. It was speculated that Intel was a company that was made. Oh, it's speculated that Intel is the one who came up with the idea for office cubicles, but now they don't use them anymore. Fun fact about clean rooms is that there are no particles in the clean room that would be above 0.5 microns. And just to give you some idea of how small that is, a human hair is about 75 microns across. So that's kind of small. They spent 13.36 billion in US dollars in 2019 for research and development. So no wonder these things cost so much money. And we mentioned Moore's law just can't keep up with the costs anymore. Oh, and this is kind of interesting. The microprocessor facility of Intel's in Costa Rica is responsible for 4.9% of the country's total gross domestic product. So, how about that?
That's pretty impressive.
Do you want a not so nice fun fact?
Oh.
I won't even say it. I don't want to end on a
No,
down note.
no, go ahead.
At least 4 of Intel's 6 CEOs have reportedly had affairs,
Oh, that seems.
albeit before the company had a non-fraternization policy. One of them was after, but the other 3 were not. See, downer.
Wow, you really brought this down.
Sorry, everyone. Do you have anything else to add, Luke?
No, that's all I got.
There's a lot of information about Intel and transistors and Moore's law and just
Quite a
everything.
bit.
We are wealth of knowledge. I have to put that out there.
I hope so.
Everyone, you're welcome for all of the knowledge that we bring to you. I understand that you're thankful for us and the hard work that we do, and we appreciate it. If you want to tell us about your appreciation for us, you think the episode was wonderful or anything else, go ahead and email us at unprofessionalengineering@gmail.com. And until next time,
See ya.